Asa, the first godly king of Judah, is known for being a good, doing what is good and right in the sight of the Lord. 2 Chronicles 14 tells us that. And then they start seeking the Lord as a nation. They have a covenant with God in chapter 15 of seeking God. And if you would not seek God, they would put you to death in Judah for a time, which we saw last week in 2 Chronicles 15. And because of their seeking God, God gave them rest. And the rest that they probably enjoyed is no wars for at least 15 years, except for that large battle, which really wasn't a battle they had to fight. They probably were just there to watch God destroy this million-man army with the chariots in chapter 15. And they went and just collected the spoil. I'm sorry, that was chapter 14. They just collected the spoil. And if you read 1 Kings 15, it gives you what's happening in the northern tribes of Israel at the same time as the south. And Baasha is a king of the north that comes to power in the second year of Asa and rules for around 24 years. So the numbers at the end of chapter 15 and the beginning of chapter 16 cannot be correct. And commentators, I read quite a few different ideas on what it should read. I think the best idea is likely it's the 15th year. At the last verse, the very last phrase of chapter 15 should probably read the 15th year of the reign of Asa. And then 16:1 should read the 16th year of the reign of Asa, because that's the time Baasha is king of Israel. And so it does match the chronology, the time frame of chapter 15, where God gave him rest for the first 10 years of his reign. They fight that huge army. Well, they don't really fight. They watch God fight. They collect the spoil. And then for 5 more years, they have rest. They have this covenant in the 15th year. And then God tests them and allows them to have a battle or some skirmish along the border of Israel and Judah in that 16th year of his reign. And Asa in chapter 16 doesn't do well. Okay. And this is the last chapter recorded about him. He rules for 41 years. He is a godly king. We know that. He's known for relying on God, but whenever someone doesn't rely on God as a king, the whole kingdom is affected. And so whenever he doesn't rely on God, we'll see what happens in chapter 16. It's a short chapter, and we want to focus on a couple verses in particular, but my outline is all ours. Okay, so the first 6 verses is replacing our strong God with weak humanity. And the title, The Folly of Not Relying on the Almighty. And whenever God confronts Asa for not relying on him, he uses the word, "You've done what's foolish." Okay, so I get the title from the text in that we'll see. The events of this story are a sad warning that our lives and influence could be known for seeking, relying, obeying God and his word. But faithfulness may result in us having money in the bank, stable relationships. For Asa, a very stable kingdom where he's not having to fight battles. He's building and building and collecting taxes, and he's filling the treasuries of the house of the Lord and his own house. So he's getting a lot of wealth. And in our lives, whenever you have a fully funded emergency fund, and you've got money in the bank for other things, and you've got retirement, and you've got health, and you've got medicine, and you got family all around you, and the tendency that we need to learn from Asa is there's a tendency when you have all of life in place that you don't rely on the Lord again. And you can rely on the Lord while you have battles, or you have trials, or you need money, or you need things, and you rely on the Lord. And we're going to replace the Lord with Yahweh, the Almighty, the great I am. You rely on Yahweh for everything when you have trials until everything is good. And then there's a temptation to not rely on him. Okay. And we learn that from Asa. He's still a godly and good king, but in this chapter, he's not relying on the Lord, and he's replacing his reliance on a perfectly strong God, and he's relying on weak humanity. God is not just concerned with how we live our lives, but also how we finish our lives. And so finishing strong is important. We'll have the Olympics in a couple weeks that we'll watch. And if someone runs a really good race, let's say a mile where they run 4 laps, and then the last lap, they're like, oh, I'm so far ahead, I'm just going to take it easy. Like you lose, right? And if you got to finish strong to get the prize. And wholeheartedly relying on the Lord your whole life. You don't want to end like Asa ends his life, or what we see at the end of his life. So the first 6 verses is replacing his strong God with weak humans. All right. Let's read 1 to 6 of 2 Chronicles 16, then a few thoughts from these verses. In the I'm going to replace 36 because that's not correct. Probably the 16th year of the reign of Asa, Baasha, the king of Israel, went up against Judah and built Ramah, that he might permit no one to go in and out to come to Asa, king of Judah. Remember, the kings of the north do not want, Jeroboam doesn't want his people going to the south to worship God in Jerusalem. And so when he goes to Ramah, that is south of Israel, and that's actually a border town, but it's in Judah. So we're in New England, and we're in a border town in Drake, and that's right on the border of New Hampshire. If you were to try to stop people from New Hampshire going to Boston, you would probably have to stop a couple major roads. Highway 3, Highway 93, Highway 95. So if this was today, and you were in the kingdom of New Hampshire, trying to stop your people from, because remember, there's a great number of people going from the north to the south, and Baasha's losing some of his army, some of his mighty men, and he's trying to stop people from immigrating. He's saying, okay, well, I'm going to build a town or strengthen the town just to the south. So it'd be like someone in New Hampshire coming to Tingsboro or Methuen and saying, I'm gonna strengthen this town, and I'm not going to allow any of people from New Hampshire to get to Boston. Okay. That would be kind of what it's like. And all of these cities, these towns are right on the border of Israel and Judah. I have a map if you want to see it after. So where this Ramah is actually in Judah, and then where Asa is going to take the stuff from and rebuild and strengthen is actually going to be like a Nashua or Pelham or Salem, where he's going to strengthen the town to the north of the border. So there's a constant back and forth of on the border. Where's the border at? Who's going to control the border to allow people in and out? So that's what's going on here with Asa and Baasha, the king of Israel. So we won't worry about the town names as much as what is Asa doing and where is his reliance. He is known for seeking God and relying on God. Verse 2. Then Asa took silver and gold from the treasures of the king's house, and the house of the Lord, Yahweh, and the king's house, and sent them to Ben-Hadad, king of Syria, who lived in Damascus. That's as far north of Israel, saying, there's a covenant between me and you, and as there was between my father and your father, behold, I am sending to you gold and silver and gold. Go break your covenant with Baasha, king of Israel, that he may withdraw from me. And Ben-Hadad listened to King Asa and sent the commanders of his army to the cities of Israel, and that's in the far north of Israel, far away from Judah, but on the border of Syria and Israel. And he starts taking over these cities of Israel, and they conquered Ijon, Dan, Abel, Mayim, and the store cities of Naphtali. And when Baasha heard of it, he stopped building Ramah because he couldn't fight. He couldn't keep building Ramah while he's getting attacked in the north. And he said, let his work cease. Then King Asa, whenever he stops building across the border, King Asa takes all of Judah, and they carried away the stones of Ramah and its timber, with which Baasha had been building with them, and he built Geba and Mizpah. And those are two towns right around Ramah. and he takes a little bit more of, so the border is constantly changing hands. All right, so what should we take away from this? Here is a man who is known for his whole life relying on the Lord, trusting the Lord. Even a 1,000,000-man army, God fights for him, and they make this covenant with God. We're going to seek God. Anyone who won't seek God is going to be put to death. And here he is. We're expecting him to trust in God and go fight against the king of Israel. Instead, what's he do? He's like, I have resources now. I don't have to rely on the Lord. I've got money. Now that I have money, I can buy allies instead of relying on the Lord. And so he goes and buys an ally and relies on his wealth and relies on himself instead of the Lord. You may say that sounds a little harsh, but what God's going to speak to him in verses 7 to 9 is exactly pretty much along those lines. So let's see what God says. So that was replacing our strong God with weak humanity. A few thoughts from this. Every trial that God allows us, Yahweh allows, is an opportunity for us to rely on him instead of another God. God always is going to, he doesn't have us serve him and worship him in a vacuum where there's no other options. You only have God as an option. We live in the USA, and we can look at politicians and say, a future president is going to be who's going to deliver our country from our problems. And some of you are shaking your head because you've lived long enough to realize many presidents have come and gone, and our country has not gotten better. It's gotten worse because we have stopped relying on God. And so what do we need to do? We need to get back to God. We need to start relying on God again. But God allows, in his sovereignty, allows us trials, and every trial is an opportunity to rely on him or to rely on another God. Second thing we can learn from verses 1 to 6. God gives us resources, but he doesn't give us resources in life so that we rely on those resources instead of him. God is the one who gives Asa the victory and allows him to get all that spoil from chapter 14. He allows him to have rest, which means whenever there's no army and you're fighting battles, you can spend all of your taxes on building and increasing the wealth of your kingdom. And he's doing that at the end of chapter 15. Mm-hmm. But when you get enough wealth, you're like, okay, I've got enough wealth. What am I going to do with it? I'm going to rely on that wealth. No. That's not how we need to look at our wealth, as a God replacement. Okay, so God does not give us resources in life so that we can rely on them instead of him, or stop seeking God and start seeking how are we going to manage all of this, all these resources. And then the third lesson I think we can learn from verses 1 to 6, Yahweh does not want us to interpret, well, it worked. If you look at verse 6, his plan at the end of verse 5 and 6, you'd say, well, it worked for Asa. What he wanted to happen actually happened. The northern tribe of Israel did stop building on the border. He was able to take their resources and make his towns stronger. So you say, well, it worked. This is called pragmatism. Well, if it works, then God must be blessing me, right? Okay. So going against God or against his word, we can interpret, well, it worked as God was pleased. Okay. So God does not want us to interpret, well, it worked as a sign of his blessing. Okay. Well, I got money in the bank, or I got this promotion, or I got this or that. I got what I was doing and not relying on God, and I got what I wanted. Interpret that as a sign of God's blessing. No, that's not how we need to interpret this, because if that was the case, then there wouldn't be a need for a rebuke. And now in verses 7 to 9, there's a rebuke that's needed. So replacing God with weak humans is foolish. And then the rebuke from Yahweh comes in verses 7 to 9. Let's read that. Verse 7. At that time, Hanani the seer, or a prophet, came to Asa, king of Judah, and said to him, because you relied on the king of Syria and did not rely on Yahweh your God, and the army of the king of Syria has escaped you. All right, so we'll just pause there. Every verse is going to be very important. Verse 9 is extremely important. Verse 7, summary. You foolishly relied on a weak army that I would have helped you defeat that army, Asa. And you can't defeat an army whenever you have a covenant with them and you rely on them. Okay. You didn't have to rely on them. And when you didn't rely on the Lord, it's foolishness. You know better. Okay. That's verse 7. Now, verse 8. Were not the Ethiopians and the Libyans a huge army? They were said to be a million-man army with many chariots and horsemen. Yet because you relied on Yahweh, he gave them into your hand. So the second thing, you foolishly forgot how I helped you defeat a stronger foe. And it was recently. This is maybe like 6 years, 5, 6 years. This isn't a long time. Do you remember 5 or 6 years ago what happened? Oh, yeah. And you can see Ace is probably like hanging his head in shame. Like, yes, I did act foolishly. Why did you do this, Asa? Because I forgot how God helped me in the past. So whenever we don't have resources and we rely on the Lord and he delivers us, whenever we do have resources, he wants us to keep relying on him, because if we don't, we deserve a rebuke from God like this. And every time we don't rely on the Lord, the Almighty, the great I am, it's foolishness for us, as foolish as it was for Asa. And then verse 9 is a verse worth memorizing and keeping it. And actually, I have a song that starts, that was written recently, that uses verse 9 in the text. Verse 9 says, "For the eyes of Yahweh, the Lord, run to and fro throughout the whole earth." Now, God's eyes aren't actually running. It's poetry, right? Right. Like God's eyes go everywhere. We would say God has eyes everywhere. God sees everything. And what is he looking for? Well, he's looking throughout the whole earth. So no one escapes what God sees. Actually, God looks at their heart to give strong support to those whose heart is blameless toward him. That word blameless has a little number 2 in my Bible, the ESV. It is probably translated differently in about every translation, from the word perfect to the word wholeheartedly. But that word blameless has this idea of complete or whole. And it's used previously about someone who just wholly sought after God. They completely devoted, loyal to God. That's this idea, dedicated to the Lord. So, and this is said of Asa and his kingdom before, back in verse 17 of chapter 15. The heart of Asa was wholly true all his days. That's, I think, the same word there. So God's looking at everyone on the face of the earth, and he's noticing the people whose heart is wholly true to him. And then what's he promised to do for them in verse 9? To give them strong support. All right. And God wants to support those whose heart is wholly dedicated, blameless, perfect toward him. So verse 9, you foolishly forgot that I see all. If you were to ask Asa in an interview after this, Asa, did you know that God sees your heart and he sees everything? He'd have to say, yeah. Why does Asa know that? Because Asa has sought God, and his whole kingdom is seeking God with their whole heart. They're worshiping God. They're getting rid of idols. They know God really well at this point. So why are you not seeking and relying on him? I forgot that he sees all. He also, in this rebuke of verse 9, you foolishly want, you forgot, and then you wanted, God wants wholehearted seeking and relying. And then God gives unparalleled support. Who is stronger than God? Would you rather have God's help, or would you rather have the king of Syria's help? Well, with what Asa did, he wanted the king of Syria's help instead of God. And that's foolishness. Why? Because compared to the Almighty, you got a weak army's help. an army that actually should be subservient to you, you should have conquered them and not relied on them or had a covenant with them. You had a covenant with God. And it's almost like they broke that covenant with God to make a covenant with a weak army. All right, so this is foolishness. And then what's the judgment here at the end of verse 9? And from now on, you will have wars. What you thought was going to resolve this conflict on the border, First Kings says Baasha and Asa had skirmishes along that border all of their days. So they had a civil war almost at the border. It was constant strife. And Asa now is not able to build a kingdom. He's always having to keep his eye on that border. That First Kings 15:16 tells us about. So how does Asa respond to this rebuke? Well, let me share a song that was written in 2000 by Joe Zichterman, Show Thyself Strong. It's in the Wilds book, page 184, that we probably have sung here at church. Thine eyes, O Lord, are searching to and fro through all the earth to find a heart who's perfect, through whom thy hand can work. What with men may now seem hopeless, still is possible with thee. Enlarge our expectations, exceed abundantly. And the chorus is Show Thyself Strong, of which we get the title. Thy hand is mighty to revive us once again. So you can see how the text of Second Chronicles 16, verse 9, inspired the author to write the first stanza of Show Thyself Strong. And this should inspire us. This should motivate us to keep relying on the Lord. God's eyes are still going throughout all the earth, and he's looking at all of our hearts constantly, and he's going to give strong support to everyone's heart you're relying on him and seeking him alone. All right, so responding to Yahweh's rebuke. Asa needed a rebuke. He got a rebuke through the prophet. And we expect some repentance, right? We expect some turning from sin, turning from that reliance on the king's army. Instead, verse 10, then Asa was angry with the seer or the prophet and put him in the stocks in prison. What? Okay, wrong. He did the wrong thing. Whenever we rebuke someone for not relying on the Lord and they start attacking you, we see this in evangelism. Whenever we're telling someone they need to rely on Christ for salvation, they say, I don't want to talk to you again. You are now my enemy. What? I told you the truth. All this seer is, all he is a conduit for, he's just a messenger of God. But we'll see throughout Israel's history, Israel and Judah, the godly kings treat the prophets well, when even an ungodly king and a couple other times, godly kings attack and sometimes kill a prophet because they tell them what they don't want to hear, but they tell them God's truth. And throughout history and to this day, there are people who are martyrs. I was just reading Acts 7 this morning. Stephen is killed because he's telling the Israelites what they don't want to hear. And martyrs today are martyrs because they're telling people God's truth, and many people don't want to hear. So how does he react foolishly? He attacks God's messenger. It's foolishness. Attacking Yahweh's messenger is not the real problem. The messenger is not the real problem. The message isn't the problem. Asa's actions were the problem, and his heart is the problem. So then he puts him in stocks, and he was in rage with him because of this. He doesn't stop with the messenger. Look at verse 10. And Asa inflicted cruelties upon some of the people at the same time. I'm going to assume the people that he attacks are the people that supported the message and the messenger, and are telling Asa, we should not have relied on that. We didn't need to rely on him. We have God with us. We are seeking God. We just need to go back to that covenant that we made with seeking God. And I'm assuming some of the cruelties that he inflicts on some of his people are his leaders or others that challenged his leadership and said, we can't follow you, Asa. The reason we're here instead of Israel is because you're relying on the Lord and God's with you. And now, and we make this covenant with you, Asa, just a couple weeks or months ago, and it seems like we're breaking this covenant with God and relying on other gods. The results then are so that's replacing God, verses 1-6, rebuke from God, 7-9, responding to the rebuke in verse 10, and now the results of a life that mostly relied on Yahweh. And we have to say mostly. We would love to just take that out. We don't want to put that at your funeral, where here's a person who mostly relied on God. Because what does that bring up? The question of, well, when did they not rely on God? Because that's what this passage is bringing out for us.
Yeah.
This man mostly relied on God, but here's when he didn't. And we wish we didn't have to say this, but this is the time when he didn't. Okay. The acts of Asa, verse 11, from first to last, are written in the book of the kings of Judah. I think it's in chapter 15 of First Kings, and of Israel. In the 39th year of his reign, he's already reigned for 39 years. He was diseased in his feet. It sounds like a judgment on God. And his disease became severe, very painful. We don't know exactly what that disease was, other than it was an infection possibly, and made it very difficult for him to walk, get around, whatever was wrong with his feet. Yet, even in this, his disease, he did not seek Yahweh, the Lord, but he sought help from physicians. Now, is it wrong for him to seek help with physicians?
No.
No, if you come to me and you've got pain in your chest, like, having trouble, what am I going to tell you? Just seek God. No, that's not what I'm going to tell you. I'm going to tell you, go to the doctor, get a cardiac, get some tests. But in all of this trial of your chest pain, you need to keep seeking the Lord.
Yeah.
It sounds like Asa doesn't seek God, and it says that even in this, he didn't seek God. He replaced God in his seeking him. So if we end up in the hospital and we aren't like some that say, no, we aren't going to need doctors at all, we're not going to take any medicine, and there might be something that there's medicine that will help us with. We're not going to be foolish in that way, but put medicine and doctors in their place. They are under the great physician. So when I went and prayed with someone who had heart surgery recently, I said, we understand in a prayer, we understand there is a great physician who can guide the hands of a surgeon in performing intricate surgery of heart operation. But we're going to rely on Yahweh. We're going to rely on the Lord while we're in the hospital, while you're facing the surgery. In a recovery, we're going to rely on the Lord to heal you. And who gets the credit then? If Asa gets better from his diseased feet and he's not seeking God and he seeks the physician, who gets credit? The physicians. If he's seeking God and listens to what the doctors say, but puts them under God, then who gets credit for healing Asa? God. So who got credit for Asa helping him at the border? The text says that the Syrians got credit. Who got credit for him helping the 1,000,000-man army? God got credit. So you can see how when we rely on the Lord primarily, and it's not wrong to have a 401k. It's not wrong to have money in the bank. It's not wrong to take medicine. But where is your main reliance? Who gets the glory for this reveals your heart and reveals who are you most trusting in. And who you are most trusting in is who God is searching your heart to see if you really are mostly trusting him. As when he sees that you are mostly trusting him, he gives strong support to you. It doesn't mean that you're not going to have trials. It doesn't mean you're not going to have people coming to attack you. It doesn't mean you're not going to have disease in your feet or disease anywhere else. It means that whenever you rely on the Lord and he helps you, he gets the glory. And you are not going to stop seeking him when times are good or when you got money in the bank, when you got resources. You're going to keep seeking him throughout life. So what we learn from this, we have a few more verses here, 12 to 14. We read about verse 12 already. He sought the physicians instead of replacing seeking the Lord. Verse 13, Asa slept with his fathers. That means he dies in the 41st year of his reign. and they buried him in the tomb that he had cut for himself in the city of David. This is an honorable way to go. They laid him on a bier that had been filled with various kinds of spices prepared by the perfumer's art, and they made a very great fire in his honor. So the best way they can honor Asa, they do, because for the most part, he really helped the kingdom. He's the first godly king. Of the top 8 kings that are godly, he's probably in the top 3. His son is probably better, Jehoshaphat, but he's still a very godly king, and they honor him. So he does have a long reign, a long life, and an honorable burial. So, but what should we learn from this final chapter of his life? Seeking and relying on the great I am is a personal choice that is tested with every custom trial that God and his sovereignty allows in your life and in my life. Every trial that God allows you to face is are you going to rely on him instead of all the other gods of the Americans? He desires that we seek him primarily instead of us seeking, obeying him with a temptation to seek and obey what we can research on the internet. The internet is a very, very powerful tool that gives the illusion that you can be God. And you don't need God or you don't even need doctors, because you can find out what's wrong with you. You can find out what medicine you can prescribe, and then go and get someone that will give you that medicine that you have determined, this is my problem, this is the solution. I'm not relying on God. Or with wealth, you can look at your stocks every single day. You can research and say, I am going to beat the stock market. I am going to self-invest. I don't need a financial advisor. I am going to be personally wealthy, and God may allow you to have personal wealth. And in the internet, you can feel like I'm in complete control of my finances, completely in control. Huh. It's an illusion. You're playing God, okay? You're not relying on God because the internet in your heart and mind has replaced God. Beware. I just say beware, because I don't go home with you. I don't look at how you spend all of your time and what are you expecting from the internet. Has it replaced the Almighty in your heart? If it has, then confess that as sin, because it's leading you away from relying on God. Rely on your God, the great I am, your Savior, Jesus Christ, way more than you rely on your wealth, your research, your medications, your friends, your experts, your opinions, your health, your intellect, and the list could go on and on. Why? Because the eyes of Yahweh still run to and fro throughout the whole earth, including New England, to give strong support to those whose heart is blameless, wholly devoted, committed, loyal, perfect toward him. He knows, he rewards, and there's no God like him.